A TV preacher is exposed for years of secret sexual sin. An entertainer is arrested for allegedly killing a spouse or a lover. Rich businessman loses everything because of seedy business practices. It's obvious they fail to follow a word of wisdom found right here in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's a word that could save your life. Before I tell you about this life-saving Hebrew word, let me take you back to the story of Jacob and Esau, the twin sons of Isaac, spoken of here in the book of Genesis. Esau was born first, and that entitled him to the special rights enjoyed by a firstborn son in the ancient world. He held the birthright, and the birthright was worth more than gold, yet in a moment's time, he gave it all away. He'd gone out hunting and came home famished, only to smell the pot of porridge that his brother Jacob was cooking. He said to Jacob, "Give me something to eat." But Jacob was a cunning man, and he said, "I'll give you some porridge in exchange for your birthright." That's like telling a thirsty man, "I'll give you a glass of cold water in exchange for your multi-million-dollar inheritance." Yet Esau did it. He gave it all away in a moment's time. He sold his birthright for a pot of porridge. I'm sorry to say, I know some people who've done even worse.
So, do you think the Bible is relevant to contemporary issues?
Yes, and in Isaiah 50, 10 and 11, it says if you don't follow the Word of God, you'll end up in torment. So,
I believe that the Bible is a little outdated, that people should look at it and make their own views of that and use it as a basic template, not to live by word for word.
You use sex as a way to find self-worth or something. Maybe finding self-worth through the Bible or through religion would be a better course for you than losing yourself through your own sexuality.
It's time for a Hebrew lesson. Clear your throat and repeat after me. Acharit. Let's say it again. Acharit. Now let me make this clear. If you keep saying this word over and over again, it's not going to change your life. But if you learn the meaning of acharit and pay attention to it, it'll save you a lot of grief and pain and anguish. So let me explain. In the Hebrew language, lots of words that have to do with prepositions or orientation or direction are derived from parts of the body. So for example, the words for first or beginning come from the Hebrew word for head, because it's the head that comes first in the human body. So also in English, we can talk about being at the head of the class, meaning being first. Well, in Hebrew, we can talk about being at the head of the mountain, meaning the top of the mountain. Or some other examples. If I'm standing next to someone in Hebrew, I'm literally by the hand of that person. If I'm standing in front of them, I'm literally to the face of that person. Well, the word acharit is derived from a Hebrew word for back, and it literally means that which comes after effects, final consequences. Let me give you the principle. From a normal human vantage point, we can't see someone's back. We don't see that which comes after. So if I tore the back of my suit jacket, left some big gaping hole in it, you wouldn't know it if you only saw me from the front. I'd look fine. But the moment I came walking by and you saw my back, you'd say, "What happened to you? Moments ago I looked great. Now I look like a wreck." And that's the biblical principle. From our vantage point, we don't see that which comes after. We don't see the final consequences of a matter. We don't see the acharit. But in God's view, the acharit is always there. He sees the end from the beginning. And if we are to avoid personal disaster, it's crucial that we must gain his perspective. We've got to see the acharit. So much of our culture is based on the exact opposite principle. It says, feed your flesh, obey your thirst, do what feels good now. Don't even think about the after effects. Come on, you need it. You only live once, baby. God's word says, remember the acharit. That's what really matters. It's the final score that counts. And when it comes to our own lives, we're not playing a game. We could make choices today that'll haunt us forever. You know, you could give into a sexual lust for a moment of pleasure and forfeit your job or reputation or marriage or family or maybe even your own life. Let's learn the lesson of the acharit. How many things have you done in life only to look back later and shake your head in disgust and say, it wasn't worth it?
Sexual temptation would be powerful because it deals more with the body and not the mind.
It's just because that's what people were made for.
Temptation is it's like anything else. You can either say yes or no.
We're in a society where we kind of want to have our cake and eat it too, and so we don't think about consequences or about God or about spouses or anything else. We just think about what we want.
Let's take a look at the ancient wisdom of the book of Proverbs and see what it has to tell us about the acharit. In chapter 5, we read this warning: "For the lips of an immoral woman are sweeter than honey. Her mouth is smoother than oil." And it says this: "Her acharit is bitter as poison, more dangerous than a double-edged sword. Her feet go down to death. Her steps lead straight to the grave." Do you see it? It's a picture of sexual seduction. She looks so good. What a body. And she's smiling at me. She wants me. I need her. I've got to have her. Just this one time, and I'll be satisfied. But her acharit, in other words, the final consequences of association with her acharit is death. A sexually transmitted disease. A jealous husband out for revenge. A scandal that gets reported around the world. An obsession that gets out of control until it costs you everything. You say, oh, but the temptation's so strong. The urge is so great. How can I possibly resist? You've got to remember the acharit.
Up next.
I think sexual temptation is very powerful because it's advertised everywhere.
Why do you think we still blow it?
They just think that they get above all the wrong and they fall into that trap.
Most of us have held a fish hook in our hands, and I'm glad I'm not a fish. That hook is really sharp, and once the fish bites into it, it's as good as dead. So why does the fish take that fatal bite? Does it have a death wish? Is it suicidal? Of course not. It's lured in by the bait. How tempting. How tasty. Chomp. And then it's over. All for one bite. The fact is, though, we're often the ones getting hooked. A Puritan leader once said, "Satan gives Adam an apple and takes away paradise. Therefore, in all temptations, let us consider not what he offers, but what we shall lose." I'll say it again, though. Our culture is based on the exact opposite principles. The advertising world sure knows how to fish, cooking up some good-looking bait to lure us in. Sometimes the bait is food itself. What a delicious-looking meal. Come on, splurge. Hey, you deserve it. 6 months later, when you're bursting out of your clothes, you say to yourself, I can't believe I've been pigging out like this. What was I thinking? Certainly weren't thinking about the acharit. Or maybe you're surfing the net. Boy, those sexual images are everywhere. Why not have some fun? After all, you're not hurting anybody. So you enter your first porno website, little knowing that 2 years later, you'll be a hopeless sex addict. And that's why the Bible warns us over and over again, before you start down that path, consider the acharit.
Next question. Why do you think sexual temptation is so powerful?
I think sexual temptation is very powerful because it's advertised everywhere. I look at TV sometimes and I see it as a lot more out there.
Because it's what your body wants. It's not good for you.
Oh, that's what makes us reproduce.
I once read a quote from an Israeli woman, and she was released from prison for murdering her husband after years of physical abuse. She said, remorse is so bitter. I would give everything just to turn the clock back. But that's one thing we can't do, turn back the clock. There was a very mature-looking 15-year-old girl who lived on Long Island. Well, she fell into rebellion against her parents and decided to get out of the house. She was hitchhiking to Texas and was picked up by a trucker who paid her to perform a sex act. Afterwards, when she got out of the truck, she wept with shame, but hey, the guilt left pretty soon. She ended up in Texas, where she fell into prostitution. She became the most popular girl working there. Well, what happened was the other prostitutes got jealous, and she realized, I've got to get out of here while I have the opportunity. But before she could get away, the pimp and his wife got her. When her naked corpse was pulled out of the river, the police chief said it was the most tortured, brutalized corpse he had ever seen. She had cigarette burns from head to toe. Her jaw was broken. She was shot through the mouth. If only she could have seen her acharit. She could have felt the terror, the pain, the agony, seen her naked body pulled out of the river. She never would have fallen into rebellion. She never would have left her parents' house. It wasn't worth it. Let me tell you about another tragic, real-life story. There was a successful pastor, married man with kids. Got discouraged, depressed, went to a bar one night, got drunk, ended up at a wild sex party, ended up being with another man. Woke up the next morning, felt miserable, he grieved over it, but picked himself back up again, and life went on as normal. Not quite. He had contracted AIDS. Before he realized it, he had infected his wife and the baby that she bore him. When I met the family, he had just been buried. A few years later, the wife and child died also. If only he could have seen his acharit. He could have seen his body being lowered into the ground and the family grieving. If he could have seen a few years later his own wife and precious baby withering away and dying from the same dread disease. If only he could have seen the acharit, he would have said to his wife before that, tie me to the bedpost, lock the door. Don't let me out. Don't let me do this crazy thing. But now, as life echoed those miserable words found in the book of Proverbs, in your acharit you will groan when your flesh and body are spent. You'll say, how I hated instruction, how I spurned correction. I wouldn't listen to my teachers. I wouldn't obey my counselors. Now I've come to the brink of utter ruin in the midst of the whole assembly. One sin, one time, one faithful end. Consider the acharit. Once after doing something wrong, I felt lousy about it. And I said to myself, if only I could remember how I felt now after doing this before I did it the next time, I'd never go that route again. It stopped me in my tracks. That's the principle of the acharit.
Dr. Brown hit the streets to discuss why people do things that may lead to their own personal destruction.
Why do you think people blow it? In other words, we all know that one way or another, it's in the Bible, our sin will find us out. One way or another, there are consequences. Why do you think we still blow it?
They just think that they get above all the wrong and they fall into that trap.
So you can deceive yourself? Like I can get away with this?
You get a swelled head. You think you're above all that. You're better than all that.
So it can,
or you'll never get caught.
You'll never get caught? Because I haven't got caught so far, right? I mean, that's what you think, right? If we deceive ourselves, there's some basis. I got away with it once. I had a drink. I'm not an alcoholic. I got high. I'm in control. Hey, we're just friends. Haven't crossed that line. And then it bites you. So do you think if somebody get a swelled head, it can happen to any of us?
Oh, sure. Sure, we can all
Free will.
Get full of ourselves.
Once you start doing something, it gets easier and easier, and then you just start drifting up to...
Get used to it.
Yeah.
Lose your conscience. What about the whole entertainment industry that surrounds us today? Do you think that desensitizes our conscience a little bit?
I think the media and the internet and everything that's out there, we're getting our information so quick and it's so diverse that it's kind of overloading.
So you can hear about 100 murders a day. In other words, you can't shock anymore. So it's got to go further. Mm-hmm. And you look at the old horror movies we grew up with, like Frankenstein. It's still scary. But you don't have heads rolling and blood gushing and limbs being cut off. So picture you're a kid, you grew up watching that. You grew up watching TV where everybody's sleeping around with everybody, and it's cool. It's all right.
You become immune to it.
You do. There's really no way to get around it. Talking to these folks on the street just reminds us again, sin has consequences. wrong behavior can be disastrous. And yet we can deceive ourselves and think, hey, it'll never happen to me. It'll happen to that guy, happen to her. It'll never happen to me. You know, the folks I just spoke with are from New Jersey. I'm from New York originally, and it's kind of a common sense approach. New York, New Jersey, you just tell it like it is. And it's so interesting to me that these folks came to the same conclusions that I've come to, not just observing life, but studying the scriptures. You know why? Because God's word, especially the book of Proverbs, is filled with common sense. It's not just some mystical, spiritual reflection. The Bible's down to earth. It speaks to us where we live, especially the book of Proverbs. And these folks could easily list one thing after another happens. You decide you're going to commit adultery. You decide you're going to get drunk and drive. You decide this and that. Hey, I'll be okay. The fact is our worlds can collapse on us quicker than we know. Or worse still, little by little by little by little, we destroy ourselves.
They're afraid. I think they're scared of what people will say about them.
One, maybe they don't know it's wrong, or two, they know it's wrong and they're sick in the head. There's something wrong with them.
When I was a boy, I remember watching cigarette commercials on TV. The Marlboro ad stood out. There was the Marlboro man, sitting on his horse. What a man! What a scene! That strong cowboy sat on his powerful steed with nothing but gorgeous green fields around him. It was called Marlboro country. And the message was clear. Even if you lived in some rat-infested apartment in the inner city, just smoking these cigarettes would turn you into the Marlboro man and transport you into Marlboro country. Not quite. The Marlboro man actually died of lung cancer. I kid you not. And real Marlboro country is the lung cancer ward of the local hospital.
One more question. Why do people knowingly do wrong?
They're afraid. I think they're scared of what people will say about them. They're afraid of what's going to happen to them if, you know, they do speak their mind and they do go along with what they believe in.
Why do people do things they know is wrong? One, maybe they don't know it's wrong, or two, they know it's wrong and they're sick in the head. There's something wrong with them.
Peer pressure and the fact that, you know, they don't have a strong family background.
They don't think about the consequences of their actions, so they go to jail.
Or maybe they think they won't get caught.
Let's go back to the wisdom of Proverbs. This ancient book has something to say to us today. Who has woe? Who has sorrow? Who has strife? Who has complaints? Who has needless bruises? Who has bloodshot eyes? Those who linger over wine, who go to sample bowls of mixed wine. Do not gaze at wine when it is red, when it sparkles in the cup, when it goes down smoothly. Its acharit bites like a snake and poisons like a viper. Do you get the picture? Look at that sparkling wine. Ooh, look at that glowing champagne. Drink it down, friend. It'll soothe your nerves. It'll lift your spirits. It'll make your troubles disappear until the day comes when you can't live without it. You wake up in the morning with your hands shaking because you haven't had a drink, and you lose everything that was dear to you. There are winos lying on our city streets, soaked in their own urine, who were once successful CEOs. Yes, it bites like a serpent. That's the acharit. So what do you think is a good way that people could avoid destroying their lives?
The fear of God.
Fear of God, yes. Trouble. What do you think would happen if people understood the consequences better before they took the plunge? Or better yet, you could see a movie of that part of your life, the newspaper reporters at your house reporting the scandal, your wife driving off with the kids, you know, the hospital telling you got AIDS. What if you could see all that before you went that direction? Think that would stop you?
Oh, yeah.
Kind of like a scared straight. Yeah.
Scared straight.
Because people don't realize what certain consequences could come out, the outcome of the things that they do. They have no idea.
Absolutely right.
Yeah, you open their eyes a little bit.
So you look at somebody else who blows it, because I host this show, I'm in ministry also, so I keep a careful record of friends of mine that were doing well, and then they thought they could just indulge the flesh, get away with murder, and they lost everything. I remind myself of that. That's the best antidote to stop me from going the same direction.
Learn from other people.
Have you ever read the Bible much?
Yes.
So, okay. You know, in the book of Proverbs, that's the whole purpose of Proverbs, to say, consider the final end. In other words, wisdom tells a kid, don't run out in the street to get the ball, because the little kid doesn't know it. So God, who knows everything, gives us the advance warning. Consider the final consequences first, and it'll keep you safe. Make sense?
Oh, yeah.
The principle of the acharit. I'm sure they never heard that word before, but they understand the principle. Show me first what's going to happen before I do it, and I won't mess up. That's wisdom. That's God's way. Several hundred years ago, a Christian leader said, the wages that sin bargains with the sinner are life, pleasure, and profit. The wages it pays him are death, torment, and destruction. That's the message of acharit in a nutshell. And it could be God's life or death message for you today. Don't be like Esau, who sold his birthright for a single meal. Don't be like that rebellious teenage girl, degraded, abused, because she just couldn't stay at home with her parents. Don't be like that gifted pastor who's yielding to discouragement caused him to slide headlong into depravity and ultimately cost him his life and the life of his wife and baby. Don't be like the Marlboro man, a symbol of freedom and strength, but really a slave to a 3-inch nicotine master and ultimately a needless casualty to cancer. Don't be like that wino on the street, falling from the pinnacle of success because he cracked under the pressures of life, first mesmerized by alcohol's peace, then victimized by its poison. No. Listen to counsel, submit to discipline, and your final end will be glorious. You've been warned. Now be wise. Remember the acharit.